I thought I was here the whole time, you know. And then they realized it's 2 hours later. But even if it was 2 hours later, why didn't they answer the phone? And there's all sorts of other. They miss appointments for doctors. If they had it at that time. They missed being interviewed for movies and things like that. So, in other words, it's all logical. There's nothing illogical except the phenomenon itself, but there's nothing illogical about what people describe. Now, the question then is, well, who are these people, these so-called people? It is the good, the bad, the ugly. It's everybody and anybody. It is people who have advanced degrees from major universities, doctorates, medical doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, attorneys, professors, all of whom are abductees who I have worked with. It is people who have dropped out of school when they were 12 years old. It is people who have dropped out of school when they were 15 years old and never gone back, and everybody in between. It's low functioning, it's high functioning, it's anybody and everybody. It has nothing to do with anything in their lives except for one thing. Their mother or their father was an abductee. And this phenomenon is intergenerational. It goes through the generation. Now, what that means is that if a non-abductee, if somebody who's not an abductee marries an abductee, all the children will be abductees. And when those kids grow up, their children will be abductees. So what you have here is a phenomenon that spreads laterally around the world and keeps up with the population because it's a global phenomenon, and one that goes through the generations and travels downward through time or upward through time, however it is, as the generations go on. So it has these similarities on a gross level, and also on an extremely precise level as well. So what we're dealing with here is a phenomenon that's never been dealt with in human history. It's extremely interesting, even if it's a part of popular culture, although it's hard to imagine it being a part of popular culture. You have to understand that the majority of abductees who know that they're abductees, and the vast number of abductees don't, they know that they've had odd lives, they've had strange experiences, but they don't connect it to the abduction phenomenon. But the ones who do come forward, they know immediately, they understand how insane it is to talk about this subject. They know that it's ruinous for their careers. If a psychiatrist were to claim that he or she was abducted by little green men from outer space, this would not be good for that psychiatrist's practice, you know? And yet, they come to me and they want to find out what is going on with them so they can just get their lives in order and not destroy their lives at the same time. And they risk everything by coming to me. They entrust in me that I will not reveal their identity. And I have never done so in all the years that I've been doing this. But the fact is that they know that this is not something that is a mental condition. They understand this is happening to them as opposed to within them. And once they find out what's going on, there's a certain odd relief in a way. Because deep down inside they think to themselves, maybe I am crazy. Maybe it's not happening to me, but I think it is. And then they realize that they're part of a much, much, much larger group, community, I would say, although it's not really a community, but population who've had these experiences, and then they begin to understand the logic of it, and they begin to understand some of the whys of it, and then they get on with their lives, not having to obsess on it so as they have before, and continue on with their career of being a psychiatrist or a psychologist or an attorney or whatever it is. So, or a scientist even, and I've worked with lots of people who are very, very high functioning in that regard. I'm sorry, I've gotten way off the track here. My brain is starting to wander in itself. It depends on what you mean by evidence. Here's what we have for that. If you mean coming back with an ashtray that says made on Mars on the bottom of it, the answer is no. People have their clothes removed immediately, and it's very difficult for them as they walk through this phenomenon, as they go from point to point, for them to secrete something on their bodies. They have no clothes. There's not a whole lot that they can pick up in the first place. Unfortunately, they don't have a snare where they can entrap a gray alien, and he plunges into a hole that can't be gotten, he can't be taken out of and covered up and then display this alien for all to see. That just doesn't happen. But they do come back, and the highest form of evidence outside of just visual evidence is unusual marks and scars on their body. Now, everybody has marks and scars. This is part of the human condition. You fall down, you get a bruise. You cut yourself, you have if it's deep enough, you might have a scar. But what abductees tell me and show me, and what I have seen with my own very eyes, is fully formed scars, scar tissue, white scar tissue, that has formed within one day. This is not biologically possible. This is not the way human beings heal. If you get a cut, it's going to bleed heavily, because this is going to be a cut that causes a scar. You're going to have to bandage it. It will then form its own scab. It will form its own healing process. And over months and months, it will turn into a fully formed white scar tissue wound. I have seen a person, for example, and I've shown this example many times because it was so dramatic to me. I did a session with a woman one day, and she lives some miles away from here, and I was at a supermarket the next day doing shopping, and I came around an aisle, and there she was, standing there. I said, gosh, what are you doing here? I knew she didn't live in this area, and she was at my local supermarket. And she said, well, I called your wife, and she told me where you were, so I went to see if I could find you. I said, okay, what's happening, She said, look at this. And she shows me her hand, and here there's a 1-inch scar right there between her thumb and her forefinger, right there on the fleshy part. I said, oh gosh, I didn't. Yeah, that's kind of astounding, because I had seen her hands the day before, and that scar wasn't there. Then she said, look at this. And on her other hand, there was another fully formed scar about 1 inch long in exactly the same place on both hands. That wasn't there the day before. One can't explain that. This is not biologically possible. I'm looking at something that is simply not possible. It is not possible. Except if you're an abductee, where it's possible. This happens all the time. This is normal stuff. People come to me with scars on their body that they didn't know they had, and let's just say you have, as one person told me, let's just say, I'll tell you a different story. A guy comes into my office at Temple University. He came from another country. He was majoring in journalism, and he had told me once he had seen it. He wanted to interview me because he was interested in UFOs. He knew that I had been working at, and he was interviewing me for an article he was writing, and all that. Even though he was a student, he was an older student also, and had already been extremely successful in his native country. He wrote with a Mont Blanc pen, is the first thing I noticed, which is a fountain pen that is extremely expensive. I've never seen it at Temple University before. And he told me about this account, how he had seen a UFO with some friends in a park once in his home country. And I asked him about marks and scars on his body, just as in casual conversation. And he had a scar on the leg, on his leg. He showed me the scar at the back of his leg, and it was interesting. He knew exactly how he got it. When he was a kid, he fell off his bike or something like that, whatever it was. And I said, but I noticed this fairly long scar on his shin. I'd say it was maybe 8 inches, 10 inches down his shin. I said, well, how did you get that scar? And he looked down at it. I literally saw the blood drain from his face. He had never noticed that scar before. He was at an absolute loss sitting in my office. He was aghast. He was like astounded. That is not possible. What I'm describing can't, if you have a scar that long, you're going to remember it. There's going to be blood, there's going to be trauma. If you're younger, this is a long scar. I don't know whether he's an abductee or not, but this is typical of abductees. This is typical. I can go on and on about that. But there are other things as well. In other words, people come back and their clothes are on backwards. Let's just say it is in the evening and they're asleep. Their pajamas are on backwards. Or an article of clothes is missing. Let's just say, or an article they have missing, like they were wearing their watch, and they have this odd missing time period and they can't find their watch. And they never find their watch again. Gone. Or they find their watch again, exactly where they normally put it, only it's a week later. Or they come back, and if you want to be astonished and you're an abductee, this will astonish an abductee as it would anybody. They're wearing somebody else's clothes. How does that happen? How can that? Well, we know that we know how this happens. This happens every once in a while. It's not that often in terms of somebody wearing somebody else's clothes, but having your clothes on the wrong way or inside out or things like that, that does happen fairly often. And we know how that happens. Is that physical evidence? Well, it all depends on what you mean by evidence, But the key thing is that they are alerted that something is wrong. Something should not have happened that way, especially if you're wearing somebody else's clothes. That's once again, in normal life, if you take a nap, let's just say, and you wake up and you're wearing somebody else's clothes and it's the middle of the day and you haven't been out of the house, your brain cannot grasp what just went on. It's not graspable. Except if you're an abductee, when we know, oh yeah, this happens, then we know how it happened, and that's. So I wish we had stronger evidence. I wish we had an ashtray. I wish we had an instrument